State, and Ernie talking about the racial justice framework that the 13th Forward campaign discusses.
Hi, everyone. Bear with me as I go through this presentation. Sorry, okay, I think I've got everything in order on slides and on Zoom. So this campaign was founded in 2019. We were first known as Labor is Labor. It was founded by a group called Worth Rises. It's part of our coalition today. And it was because of leadership and organizing by incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people, talking about the horrendous conditions in New York State's prisons. So please just take a minute, take a second to read this quote, to think about what it says. Okay, so like Ariel was saying earlier, today we're going to talk about 13th Forward, our campaign. I am sorry, my name is Jacqueline. If you weren't here, I work at the Legal Aid Society of New York City, where I'm a case handler in the Workers' Rights Unit, or in the Workers' Rights Practice, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm going to present on the history prison labor in New York State, and Ernie from Color of Change is also going to give a presentation. We'll have a word from our legislative sponsors. They are State Senators Eleanor Myrie from Brooklyn, New York, and Assemblymember Epstein, Harvey Epstein from Manhattan. The co-founder and executive director of Family and Friends of the Wrongfully Convicted are going to talk about their experiences working in New York State's prisons. And the formidable Lisa Zucker from the New York Civil Liberties Union is going to talk about our bills and the constitutional amendment. At the end, we'll have a question and answer section. 13th Forward, if you don't know, is a campaign. It's a campaign led by national and New York State-based organizations to end the exception in our Constitution that allows for the forced labor of incarcerated workers. And we're led by Color of Change, the New York Civil Liberties Union, Citizen Action of New York, the Legal Aid Society, New York City.
Oh, Jackie, 1 second. People in the chat are saying that they can't see the person talking. Can you all not see the presentation or Jackie while she's speaking? I'm going to just make sure that I have that correct. Okay, people can see both. Okay, great. Thank you all so much for bearing with us through these technological issues. I set up the Zoom. I'm not very tech savvy, the perils of being a lawyer and not tech support. Thank you, Jackie.
You'll see me soon enough. But let's focus on the presentation for now. We are made up of a coalition of worker centers, criminal justice advocacy organizations, legal services organizations, organized labor. And it's a coalition that's growing. So we're really excited for people and organizations to get excited about this campaign and to join us. We're part of a national movement. Since 2018, Utah, Colorado, and Nebraska have changed their state constitutions successfully to end the loophole that allows for prison slavery. There's a national movement that's going on right now. I think it was Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon who was pushing an abolition amendment to change the US Constitution to remove the 13th Amendment loophole. One of the reasons why we're having this teach-in is because we want to give people some information about how New York State today exploits the labor or exploits incarcerated people, the labor of incarcerated workers. What's on the screen is a list. It's alphabetical. What you can see is starting from A and ending at M. It's about half of the jobs that incarcerated people work or staff in New York State's prisons. This is over 100 jobs. There are over 200 jobs that incarcerated people work, maintaining New York State's prisons from from dairy worker to custodial work, groundskeeping and maintenance, from barber shops to organizing programs and doing laundry. And New York State pays incarcerated workers to do those jobs pennies per hour. If you're on the bottom of the pay scale, so pay grade 1, make between 10 and 13 cents an hour. If you're within pay grade 2, it's 16 to 18 cents an hour. Pay grade 3, 20 to 22 cents per hour. The minimum wage in New York State's prisons hasn't changed since 1993, when then Governor Mario Cuomo raised the wage from 8 cents an hour to 10 cents. Incarcerated workers earn between 10 and 65 cents an hour today. That's before wage garnishments. If you make $10 for working for 2 weeks, the state can take 4 of those dollars, 40%, to pay old court fees and fines. And just like that list we showed you a few slides ago, the list of jobs, we've done a lot of foiling and research. Our data shows that most workers earn 26 cents. The vast majority of workers inside New York State's prisons earn less than 26 cents per hour. Well, you may be wondering why we have such an exploitative and profiteering prison system in the country and in New York. And the unfortunate reality is that the system was developed in New York State. In 1817, a prison still exists today in Auburn, New York, called Auburn Prison. It's right outside of Syracuse, was built. And in the early 1800s, it was out with the old, right, which was right after the Revolutionary War, out with the British ways, and in with states were experimenting with different prison systems. Auburn Prison was the first prison to have incarcerated people, to force incarcerated people to work communally to manufacture goods. And they sold those goods below market rate. And because of their proximity to the Erie Canal, those goods went up and down New York State, and the prison made a lot of money. Today, that system still exists in New York. If you're a former SUNY student like I am, you may recognize those dressers as part of your dorm furniture. Or if you went to New York City's public schools, you may recognize that infamous desk chair combo. Of course, if you're a driver, that license plate, a Medicare recipient, those glasses options. Those are all manufactured by incarcerated people who make between 26 and 65 cents an hour working for Corecraft. Corecraft is the prison factory system that exists at 13 of New York State's prisons. And it makes millions of dollars per year. And you can see it brings millions of dollars in revenue per year back to the state's budget. You can see that in fiscal year 2020 through 2021, so during the pandemic, when the market was crashing, Corecraft made $42 million a year. It's not a very big dip. The reason is because New York State forced incarcerated workers to continue to manufacture goods during a pandemic, and people got sick. Incarcerated workers made thousands of coffins and bottles of hand sanitizer that were shipped downstate, and that then Governor Cuomo was touting as this incredible service. The system that was first developed, the Auburn system that was first developed in New York, is now everywhere. Corecraft exists in almost every state. I've highlighted a few: MassCore, the Texas Correctional Industries, Tri-Core. Even the federal government has a Corecraft version called Unicore. Okay, so I hope I've answered some of that question of how New York State exploits the labor of incarcerated people. I'm gonna pass it on to Ernie, the infamous Ernie Britt, to take on.
Thank you so much, Jackie. As I introduced myself earlier, I'll do it again, just in case you are just jumping on or missed the first couple minutes. My name is Ernie. I am a senior campaign manager at Color of Change, the nation's largest online racial justice organization. So ending forced labor is a racial justice fight. This is a clear legacy of slavery. I know that Louise in the chat called it modern day enslavement, and that's exactly right. When the 13th Amendment was ratified, ending chattel slavery, there was a critical and intentional loophole left: the language, except as a punishment for crime. So that means that slavery, forced servitude, is abolished except as a punishment for crime. And as a result of that, states across the country rushed to criminalize Black people and institute new laws, new rules that pushed more and more Black folks into prisons and into the carceral system. If you've heard of Jim Crow laws, if you've heard of Black codes, that's a part of what those laws and systems did. And even fast forward to the 1980s, the 1990s, we can look at the war on drugs and the 1994 crime bill as an extension of that legacy. These were legislative actions, rule changes, policy changes that expanded what criminality looked like. In the case of the war on drugs, it was explicitly created to target Black people in Black communities and push them into a system that still exploits their labor. 150 years later, after the ratification of the 13th Amendment, prison labor is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Jackie showed us the tens of millions that New York State pulls in from exploited prison labor. This system, as she mentioned, has been replicated across the country, and it's a multi-billion-dollar industry today. We can go to the next slide. So yeah, and when we're looking at 13 Forward and honing in on New York State specifically, you can look at the numbers and see how this is actually targeting Black people, right? Only 14% of New York State's population is Black, yet 49% of the New York State prison population is Black. It's obvious that communities that are over-surveilled, over-policed, over-incarcerated, Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities predominantly are being forced into the prison system, and as a result are being forced into this rebranded form of forced labor and slavery. In New York, incarcerated people are still forced to provide the state their labor. The state uses that forced labor to minimize the cost of producing public goods. New York isn't unique, as we have said here, but 13 Forward is focused on this issue in New York State and looking at this legislative session as an opportunity to take real action to end this practice. And I will stop there, but always open. If you have any questions, drop them in the chat. I would love to go on and on about this and how meaningful something like 13 Forward is to racial justice fights. So definitely feel free to drop your questions in the chat and I will try my best to answer them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ernie. We want to take a moment to shout out our legislative sponsor, Senator Myrie and Assemblyman Epstein. I know that Senator Myrie could not be here today, but before we get to that, I do just want to highlight Ernie's discussion about racial justice for this issue. There are lots of links between the chattel slavery and the devaluation of Black labor in this country. And this issue is at the crux of a lot of the systems of oppression that we see. So it's certainly a racial justice issue and one of the most important campaigns that I've worked on. And in order to, excuse me, you all, highlight what is the racial justice issue, we have formerly incarcerated and directly impacted people. Mr. Smith, I see that you are with us on camera. I don't know where Mr. Hamilton is. Mr. Hamilton, if you are in the meeting, can you type in the chat so that I can add you to this panel?
He just texted me and told me he was on.
Okay. I'm going to search his name. I don't see a
He's
hand.
here. He's on.
Oh, okay. Perfect.
Hey,
Hi.
how you doing? How y'all doing? Sorry.
No problem. Thank you so much for talking to the coalition and all the people who are in the audience today. If you could start just by talking a little bit about yourself and how you founded Families and Friends of the Wrongfully Incarcerated. What is your personal connection to the organization? How did this wonderful organization come to be? And I'm going to mute myself while you all.
Can you hear me? I was wrongfully convicted. I served 21 years in prison for a murder that I did not commit. And while I was in there, I realized that the system was so unfair that if I was to ever get out of prison, it would be because of our advocacy and the fact that, our families had to be our voice on the outside because every motion that I filed was being denied, no matter what the evidence was, no matter how much proof there was that I was innocent, the judge was just throwing away the motions and saying denied, and just, arbitrarily just leaving me in prison. So one day I had sent my wife down to the courthouse to speak to the secretary of the judge, and she said, look, if you ever to get out of prison, you're gonna have to have people talk about who you are as an individual, because the prosecutors is coming in and they saying you're a very bad person, and they swaying the judge not to release you, not based on the merits of your claims, but based on the fact that they are saying you're a bad person. So at that moment, I began speaking to other people that was in prison who had the same situation and problem as me.
Hey, Derek, I don't know if it's just me, but I lost your audio.
Yeah, we lost him. Derek. I'm gonna piggyback till he comes. Is that okay?
Yes, that's perfect.
So what Derek Hamilton did along with others is he reached over the wall and he educated his family, particularly his wife, on some of the things she should be doing to help him get exonerated. He also reached out to an individual by Lonnie Surrey, who's also one of the co-founders of the organization, and together they got together and rallied the truth, and they would go out and rally, outside of court buildings, outside of district attorney's office. They would also go to other family members that was in prison with Derek at that time, and they would get their family members to support them in the rallies. And that's how it really kicked off. That was the exception of it. When Derek was released in 2011 is when he came home and he picked up the baton and he took off with it, and he continued. One of the first rallies he was instrumental in helping to get Charles Hine, a former Brooklyn DA, removed out of office because he was responsible solely for wrongfully convicting a lot of individuals by helping a detective many of y'all probably heard of by the name of Louis Scarcello. I came home in 2012 real fast. I served 27 years in prison for a crime I didn't commit. And when I was released in 2012, I ran into Derek and he asked me to come aboard with him. I told him, yeah, just in passing. But by God's grace, I ran into him again 60 days later. He said, Vinny, I thought you said you was gonna come and help me. So it was at that point that I made a commitment effort and said, come on, we're gonna help. And I came aboard, we started doing this work from 2010 all the way to 2020. We would just do rallies outside and we would educate the public about incidents of wrongful convictions. We would champion, we helped former DA, may he rest in peace, Ken Thompson get elected. We got Charles Hines out, and we would just go around and galvanize all the family members who said they had a loved one in prison, wrongfully convicted. And then one day in 2019, someone came to us and said, why don't y'all set up the organization as a 501c3? We was not thinking about that because we turned our pain that we went through in prison, that Derek White went through, we turned it into passion. And we just wanted to do this work. We wasn't concerned about getting paid. We just wanted to be the voice of those who was in prison who didn't have no voice, because we know what it was like. So in 2020, I set out to go get 501c3. And then, we was granted that, and that's where we got to the present day. We're going on our second year anniversary of being 501c3, but this work been in existence since 2010. We've been doing it. We continue to do it. This is we look at wrongful convictions as a disease. This is a public health crisis. It has a huge impact on the Black community, the brown community, and poor communities, So what we want to do is we just want to set up a system that's fair and equal to everybody, regardless of your race, regardless of your gender, and regardless of your income. And that's what we've been doing today. And that's what we're going to continue to do. And, we want to thank you for this opportunity and allowing us to come and speak.
Mr. Hamilton, did we figure out your tech issues?
Yes, we did. We did.
Okay.
I'm on the telephone. So, unfortunately, when the call or something comes in, I get muted. But Kevin definitely hit all of the aspects. The main thing for us was to make sure that we got justice. And through our organization, the detective that locked me up, we got 16 other people exonerated. We was able to prove that he was framing Black people on a horrendous level. And then we continue to do the work. We got a few exonerations in the last few years. So we just continue to free people that don't belong in prison. And on the on the 13th Amendment and all that. I guess when you're ready, we'll speak on it. But we lived that. Like, we lived through the process of being in prison and being forced to work, to being forced to accept jobs just to not be keep locked, not be thrown in the box. And it was horrendous for us because we knew that we was innocent. We knew that the most important thing to us was the law library. I didn't care about being a porter or being any of that. I didn't care about any of that. All I cared about was going to the law library, educating myself so that I can be the smartest person in the courtroom when I walked in there, because I knew that I wasn't getting justice. And if I wanted to do anything, it was law. And opportunities, I had to be a porter. I had to sweep and clean the jail. And I was opposed to being here. But yet just to, not be keep locked or thrown in the box, I had to be a janitor. You look, the money that you get is nothing. They don't pay you. Like, they say that they're paying you for a service, and in reality, there's no pay because they take it right back from you through false tickets and stuff like that. So they got ploys even to get this 5 cent, 15 cent, 20 cent back. All the whole prison system is designed. It's a slavery. It's modern day slavery. They teach anti-social behavior. If Kevin's my next door neighbor and he's hungry and need a sandwich, if I give it to him, that's a misbehavior report. So the way that it's designed to destroy you. I think if I work for a corporation for 20 years, at the very least, when I get out, they would give me a job, right? Because they know I'm a good worker. I worked for you for 20 years for 15 cents an hour, right? So when I get out, I can't even get a job from you. All I'm getting is discriminated against if I apply, but you got my resume on file because I enslaved for you for 20 years. So it's just not that they're not paying you while you're in there. When you out, you can't even get a decent job to, feed your family now. You rolled my back for 20 years. At least give me an opportunity now to let my family at least, enjoy some of some of the hard labor that I'm giving you today. I'm a good worker. So, it's all those things and that spirit that I'm here today. To beg the legislators to find a pay scale that really, really justifies, that gives you, if it's not minimum wage, let there be a wage, at least I can buy my child something. I had 3 children when I was in jail. When I was took away, I was a caretaker, right? So now what happens to them? I got to be on the phone begging them, to give me a few dollars to buy my kid a pair of sneakers, and I was innocent, so at least let me be able to contribute to my household, especially if I'm being counted amongst your census in that area in which I'm locked up. So you're getting money for me, yet and still you're not paying me none of it. And I'm doing the hard labor. If it wasn't for prisoners, the prison would fall on its face, right? The prisoners does the mess hall. They clean. They do electricity work. They rebuild the prisons, right? They rebuild the prisons. The accreditations they get every year is because prisoners work hard to make sure the prisons are accredited. And it used to drive me crazy. I couldn't understand it, but that's the reality, And I think that, the legislation know that these are hardworking men who have families on the outside, who needs that money to be able to survive. And I just pray that we get through to them today and something that we say.
May I also add that while 14% of the blacks, there are 14% of blacks in New York State and 49% of the prison population are blacks, 75% of the people in prison come from 7 neighborhoods in New York City: Crown Heights, East New York, Bedford-Stuyvesant, Lower East Side, South Bronx, South Jamaica, and Harlem. That's what the prisons breed on, those particular neighborhoods. And I'm reminded of a quote from out of Sada Shakur's book when she stated that it's hard for us to get a job in the streets, but once we come to prison, jobs are plentiful. And identified that, like Derek just described, they got all sorts of jobs for you to do. But when you be released from prison, they discriminate you on all methods. Michelle Alexander, she didn't miss when she said the new Jim Crow, because that's all this is, the new Jim Crow. Some old timers will say ain't nothing new about it, because they still got that whip on black folks' back.
You two have said a lot of information. I want to pull some of the highlights out first. I want to talk about how jobs are assigned when you're incarcerated. From what Mr. Hamilton was saying, it seems like just, whoever the CO likes, it's arbitrary. Anything can lead to you either getting a job that is either dangerous or not desirable with lower pay, or the opposite. Whoever the CO likes is going to get the more desirable jobs. Can you talk a little bit about what the process looks like for someone who is incarcerated to get, like, what does it look like for them to get that job, and how is it, how does it change as you spend more time incarcerated? What does that process look like?
Well, it's different in terms of each jail, but there's a program committee that's designed to give you a job based on your need, right? So let's say that I don't have vocational training, and vocational training is something that is required for me to be able to meet my program assessments, right? In order to go to parole board or whatever it may be, to be more rehabilitated, as they say, right? So then when I go to the program committee, they may assign me to building maintenance. They may assign me to a vocational job for a period until I accomplish this task, and then I can come back and move on to something else. So they do assign you based on whatever your program needs say that you need, but a lot of times those programs is outdated, right? So they give me auto mechanic, and they teach you old way of doing auto mechanic work. They're not giving you diagnostics, stuff like that to put in and plug in so the computer can tell you what's wrong with it. So everything they got is basically outdated, but they give you these programs to satisfy the mandate that, you're to do these things. Even if you have some of these mandates, right? If there's no other programs in existence, they got to fill a slot, they require you to take that slot, right? So let's say I go in and I'm qualified to be a law library clerk. And I've been a law library clerk in, let's say, every other jail that I've been in. And I come to this facility and I say, hey, I want to be a law library clerk. They may say, no, you ain't going to be a law library clerk. We want you to be a porter for 6 months. And after you do 6 months of porterhood, then I'll think about giving you a law library job. So there's, it's like I said, every jail is different, but every jail supposed that you go through a program committee in order to be assigned. And it's up to that program committee person. Sometimes the cop will call the program committee supervisor and say, I want this guy. If they call and say they want you, you get the job. So, it's all about who you may know, but everything goes to the program committee. And there's no set way you're going to get it. I got to the law library in my last jail in Auburn before I came home, was because the guys in the law library went to the superintendent and said, look, we really need this guy down. He's smart. And they got me in. So it's just different ways. There's no set standard. Kevin, you got something you want to say about that?
Yeah, I just want to add on too that a lot of jobs like the industry, the mess hall, those jobs that pay the most money, for the most part, individuals go into them jobs because they want to make a decent commissary buy. They want to have money sometimes to send to their loved ones to come up and visit them. So they're going to the industry and make license plates and make desks and make soap and make state greens, right? So they can make a few dollars, or go in a mess hall and be a cook and make a few dollars. But we always call them slave wages jobs. All them jobs in prison to us was slave wages. So a lot of time, like Derek described earlier, we would really oppose them. We wouldn't really do it out of kindness. We would look for other things to do. We would pick and choose some of the things we wanted to do. And there was times like, for me, I would refuse certain jobs that they try to pose on me. Like they were trying to make me go and do this or do that, something I ain't want to do. And I become rebellious. My spirit become rebellious. And now I'm forced to be key locked. Because once that light went off in your head and you seen what prison was about, that the labor that they're getting, it helped boost the economy on the outside. It benefits the communities upstate. They count you as residents outside the community, outside the jail that you're living in. That's money that could be coming back to our community to build it and lift it up. Yet it goes to putting water sewages in them upstate communities, to providing parks for them people. It's a big industry. It's a booming industry. So they getting free labor off us. Like I said, Michelle Alexander, she didn't miss when she said the new Jim Crow, because they're using labor, free labor, to get all these, to make all these products. And when you come out of jail, if I was working a license plate for 27 years and I was in prison, there's no place out here for me to come out here and make license plates. I'm worse off than when I went in for 27 years. So these are the issues that we wrestle with. Again, man, you know, we support this legislation. You know, families and friends that are wrongfully convicted, we definitely behind it. You know, we really welcome and thank you guys for allowing us to even be a part of this experience. Because, you know, this is what we work on, you know, advocacy work, you know, for changing policies and procedures that impact us, affect us, and it continues to affect us. You know how long this has been going on? Y'all just gave the history of the Auburn prison. When you see the pictures in Auburn, when they first opened up the prisons, the complexion of the people that was in the prison at that time didn't look like Derek and I. But in the 70s, that complexion began to change. And then all these laws made it easier for them to get in. You know, the war on drugs in the 70s with Rockefeller. Then the prison boom in the 80s with the Clintons. You know what I'm saying? Then an influx of blacks and Hispanics start coming to prison. There was one time when I was in prison, in dorms, they had people like the dorm that hold 50 people, it held now 120 people. You know, so that create more COs, you know, because people gonna fight, you know, they're gonna get to fighting. So what do COs say? We need more Sallys, we need more Johns, we need more Bobs. So just create jobs, it's an industry. So again, you know, we're not being too long-winded. We just thank you for this opportunity, you know, to share our experiences, our insights with you on this webinar.
Sorry, I just want to address one question in the chat really quickly. Mr. Smith, you talked about the 7 neighborhoods where most of the incarcerated people come from. Can you repeat that list for people, please? Sorry, I think I accidentally.
You had me muted.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm gonna go from the top: South Bronx, Harlem, Lower East Side, South Jamaica, Crown Heights, Bedford-Stuyvesant, and East New York are the 7 neighborhoods. 75% of prisons, 75% of the people in New York State prisons come from those 7 neighborhoods. There was a group of individuals who did a study in Greenhaven, and they discovered these findings, certain zip codes that they target, you know, and that's what 75% of us come. That's why when we was in prison, we all know each other. You know, when I see Derek in jail, I say, oh, you from here? Okay, we all know each other because we all from the same neighborhood. So the prison breeds off these particular neighborhoods in New York City, these 7 neighborhoods.
Mr. Smith, before we move on to the next question, I just want to highlight what you and Mr. Hamilton are talking about in terms of prison labor really being an industry and the state having these kind of perverse interest in incarcerating people and sending them upstate because it is an industry. Those upstate areas get census money. For anybody who doesn't know, when you are incarcerated, you are counted as a person who is living in the area where you're incarcerated for the census and not your home community. So that obviously has a magnified effect on what your community is able to access for federal funds and state funds. And it gives the upstate communities a disproportionate amount of money. And there is an incentive to incarcerate people upstate to create jobs, to create industry, you know, to create desks for school children. The NYPD gets an incredible amount of money for the office supplies that they use. So Mr. Smith and Mr. Hamilton, can you talk a little bit about the conditions of labor when you're working, not just the conditions when you're incarcerated, but what does it look like to be working in some of these dangerous jobs? We did a FOIL, and one of the jobs is asbestos removal, an incredibly dangerous job. Can you talk about what the conditions look like?
Well, let me just say, I never worked in those, any of those industries, but I've seen people work there, right? And what you see is that the protective gear or the fumes that they're breathing in, like there's a lot of people that's home now that I know that worked in them, that got cancer, they're sick, right? And you don't hear about that. Like that's not something, you hear about this World Trade Center, the 911 fighters went in, they got sick from that, right? But it's the same thing that happened with those guys that's doing asbestos. You got a lot of guys in prison that came home very, very sick from breathing in toxic stuff in those industries. And, you know, they don't have lawsuits. They're not suing. They're not getting compensation for that, right? Now, I've never worked in it, but what I'm told is, first of all, you got to understand there's a minimum standard, right? If you go to the program committee and they tell you you're working in the industry, if you say no, you get on minimum standards. You're punished for that, right? Now, when they in there, those guys are like slaves. They really like slaves. You hear the complaints every single day how the officers treat them, right? A lot of them can't even go to the regular mess hall. They eat in there, right? So now around the same fumes that you got to use to make lockers or you got to use to make license plates, you breathe it all day. You got to eat there also, right? And it's not sanitary conditions of what I'm told, right? They don't clean up real good, you know, wipe everything down with Lysol like we got access to in there. You don't have those same type of products. You don't provide those same type of products. So the cleanliness is not going to be great because the cops don't care about the cleanliness. They're not eating in there. They get in the lunch break and leave out of there to go eat, right? So they don't have to worry about the toxicness. But it's very toxic environment. You hear that from the people that work there more than I can ever tell you. And some of those guys coming out with cancer, they're coming out with throat cancer and stuff like that. And they're not really being treated and compensated for it. They're dying out here from it. And nobody's really talking about that.
Yeah, also to add on, when I was in Auburn, this individual lost a finger working in the metal shop, metal shop. Them industries have real huge machineries and, you know, they're very dangerous and, you know, there's no way for anyone to really get a lock on some of the stuff because you need to be trained to go in there. You come, like Derek said, right out of program committee and go right into one of them industry spots. There's no training. They just put you in a particular area needed. And they just tell you, hey, do this and do that. You know, if while you work on one of them heavy machines and somebody call you and you turn your head, next thing you know, your finger could be gone or something like that. It's very hazardous. Again, I never went in there. I know numerous guys went inside them shops, you know, for various reasons or whatever, but it's a very healthy environment. They really don't care about you in prisons. They just want to get your free labor and continue doing what they're doing because that's all they're doing is using, exploiting you, like y'all said. They're exploiting you for your free labor and they're milking you. We call it having a whip on your back. You know, that's what we say. Somebody asks you, yo, Rennie, how you doing? I say, I'm working like a government mule. That's a term we used to have when we was in prison. If you see me mopping the floor, or you see me in a mess hall, or you see me in an industry shop, that's a term we should use that I'm working. They working me like a government mule. That's a term that we call in prison. And that's what that is. They're getting free labor out of you. So, you know, again, when that light went off in my head, I opposed all that. I said, you're not going to get no free labor. And plus I'm in jail with something I ain't due to, and I'm fighting to try to get out. And now you want to utilize my services, you know, so I rebel against that. But it's unhealthy, it's unsafe. And, you know, they pay you pennies. I think the last time New York State I seen up there had a raise was when the father was in office, right? Cuomo. Now look, the good thing about it, ironically, when the son came in office, the first thing he did was he closed some of the prisons. I don't know if you remember that, you guys. I was in prison. He said upstate communities will no longer benefit off of prisons. They would no longer be an economic base for them. And he started shutting down jail because you had some jails, they wasn't even at full capacity, but the staff was still at full capacity. They was milking overtime. You had officers milking overtime. So, you know, ideal, Cuomo stopped all that. And, you know, I could appreciate him when he came in office and he did, you know, he did a lot of things with prisons that eased a lot of the tension that was going on in terms of the work habits and the way we were dealing. And again, phone calls. When you pick up a phone for 10 seconds to call your loved one, the price was exuberant. It was more than a 30-minute call of you guys talking to each other. I never even heard the word exuberant until I seen it with the phone call and I went and researched it. And I was like, wow, they milking us. They're milking us. It's an industry. It's an industry, a huge industry.
Mr. Smith and Mr. Hamilton, thank you so much for coming and sharing your experiences. Do either of you have final thoughts? Do you want to tell the audience anything that really you need them to know before we move to the next part of our agenda?
Yeah.
Oh, I think you're muted, Mr. Hamilton. Let me see if I can unmute you.
I'm muted. I got you.
Okay, okay.
So I think I would just like to say that human beings are human beings. And if you really want people to come out of prison whole, then you should treat them like you want to be treated. I mean, I think the most fundamental thing you can do for a person that's incarcerated is give them the skills and pay them wages to show them that they're worthy to get out. Because a lot of people never had jobs before. A lot of these guys going young, inexperienced, and you don't give them the social skills that they need in terms of, look, you work, you get paid, right? You work, you be treated different. They're working and they get nothing. They get absolutely nothing but humiliated. And I think that we should change that as human beings because it's the right thing to do in America. And I want to close out on that.
Yeah, I just want to say real quick that the prison industrial complex is not in need of reform. It's in need of change. Reform is just putting a Band-Aid on it and it just soothes the cut and then eventually it goes away and it pops back up. It needs to be completely changed, top down. Top down, that's all I want to say.
You two have said an incredible amount. Thank you so much. We are so thankful that you came to speak. I see a lot of questions in the Q&A, and I also see questions in the chat, and we have a Q&A section, so we'll definitely answer as many questions as we can. But next on the agenda, we're going to be hearing from our legislative sponsors. I believe Assemblyman Epstein is here. I will promote you to panelists, Assemblyman Epstein, and then from Senator Myrie's office, I believe Justin Perkins. If that is not correct, then please let me know, but I believe that those two are here for us today. Thank you.
Thank you for having us, and thank you for doing this.
Yes, thank you very much, guys. Member Epstein, do you want to go first?
Yeah, first of all, I want to really just thank the organizations that are really bringing this together and highlighting this history and the problems around forced labor and forced labor imprisonment. It's just, it's part of the ugly history that you go back from slavery and Jim Crow and forced labor in the United States. This is not a new phenomenon. This is 400 years of history of power and oppression, and this is just the newest example of it. And so we are really collectively trying to change this. This is not an aberration. This is how the system was intended to function, and it is our job of people of conscience today to do something about it. And Senator Myrie and I have been working on this issue for a few years now, and there are many aspects of this. One is how do we manage the forced labor issue and stopping or forced labor happening with, for people behind the walls. We see it happening, people being punished for not taking jobs, jobs that are dangerous and not meaningful and difficult and, could cause real serious risk. So we need to, one, end that. Two is we need to talk about real wages. Why are people not being given minimum wage? If they were building that same chair that we sit on in the Senate and the Assembly chambers in a factory, people would be paying minimum wage. But the government abuses New Yorkers because they buy from Corecraft all these chairs in every police station you ever go, every government building, every school, every license plate is almost certainly built by someone who's behind the walls, built by prison labor, and built for pennies on the dollar. You're paid 13 cents an hour, 13 cents an hour for building something that you're required to do because we're forcing you to do it. What kind of message are we sending to our New Yorkers? What kind of message are we sending to our future? So one is ending the forced labor. Two is giving real wages, and three is giving real skills that are transferable to people when they get out. Those are the three aspects of what we need to move forward on. And I know Senator Myrie and I are standing together to work to change the structural oppression that exists. Again, this is not going to be easy because as we know, structural oppression and racism is systemic and endemic within our society. But it is beholden upon all of us to act, to get our colleagues in government to stand with us, to talk about it, to talk, the cost is the cost. If we're paying people minimum wage, it's more money. But that's every job, every labor issue is, you can get someone to build something for 10 cents, and when it really should cost you $10 to build, then you're profiting off someone's labor, and we need to stop that. And that's exactly what we're trying to do with this legislation. We need to change it. It is an uphill battle, but we need you all in the fight. And the message that needs to be clear to you all is, we cannot do it without you. We cannot win this struggle without people on the ground talking to people all over the state, talking about this as a racial and economic justice issue. So please do what you can to stand with us in this fight to change the systemic problems that exist. And I really am honored to be doing this work in conjunction with this amazing coalition and Senator Myrie.
Yes.
Thank you.
Should I don't know, should I turn it over to you, or? I don't know.
If with your permission, Ariel.
Yes, please, please.
Yes, thank you, Member Epstein. And it's good to see so many familiar faces on this call and some new ones. Really want to extend Senator Myrie's apologies for not being able to be with you all tonight. However, we really want to extend our thanks to Mr. Smith, Mr. Hamilton, Ariel, Jackie, Ernie, for this presentation and organizing this. Just to piggyback off of what Member Epstein said, this is it's immoral, and there are many factors behind this that need to be rectified. Going back to the election of 1876, and even prior to that is probably where it all we do know is where it all went wrong. So whether it's Black codes, Jim Crow laws. This is a epidemic dating back to, I know when my great-grandparents were in South Carolina, and I know where Senator Myrie's kin was in the South. So, we are all affected by this, not only us in the legislature, but those, advocating for this as well. And, aside from, a lot of our advocacy, Senator Myrie has bills that specifically address this, whether it be the Prison Labor Minimum Wage, or the Eliminating Mandatory Minimums Act, wrongful convictions, which leads to people in prisons which they can't get out, and for 20 some odd years working for cents an hour, immoral, unethical, and it needs to change. So, again, to what Member Epstein said, this is a multi-layered approach. We would love your support. We're going to be dropping, at least Senator Myrie's office, Jake included, who's on this call, we'll be dropping our contact information. Please reach out to us with anything we can do to help. I know we've been in contact with Lisa on some of our bills and the rest of the coalition. So please, we appreciate your work. We appreciate everything that you do, and please see us as partners in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to our legislative sponsors. For some people who may have to jump at 7 p.m., this is being recorded. You can also get more information by going to 13thforward.org. That is 13thforward.org. Sign up at the landing page there. Yes, Ernie has put it in the chat. So if you all have to jump and can't make the second part of our presentation, then please remember to sign up for that so that you can stay in touch. And Jake Iceland has also put in the chat his information. So we're going to move on to the next part of our campaign, which is actually talking about the bill and the language, what the bill language looks like, and how the number of changes that the bill has gone through over the past couple of years with Lisa Zucker from NYCLU. And the web address is on the page. Oh, it was on the front page. So hopefully everyone got that. But if you can't, just 13thforward.org. So Jackie, if we could continue with the presentation, and Lisa, if you could kick us off. Thank you. Thank you so much to our legislative sponsors.
Thanks, Ariel. Just one quick correction. It's 13thforward.com, not .org, but that's okay. So thank you. And thank you so much, Mr. Smith and Mr. Hamilton. Everything you said so resonated with me, and I'm sure the other members of the coalition. These are things that we have been talking about and that we learned from a couple panels that we held in the fall. And it's just amazing the consistency, you know, anyone you talk to on the inside who's had these kind of jobs say the same thing, you know, how exploitive they are, how dangerous they are, and really like how humiliating it is to actually want to buy something for your kid, right? For Christmas, for their birthday, if they need a new pair of shoes, and have to beg your friends because you're, you know, making like 13 cents an hour. It's really heartbreaking, and we thank you so much for sharing your stories. So I am going to talk about the legislation, and hopefully I'm not going to do it in a song and dance, but I'm hopefully going to make it not too like kind of lawyerly or boring because it's anything but that. So a little bit of the background. In the fall, as I said, we held 2 impacted people's forums with formerly incarcerated men and women in order to center their voices and inform and educate us about the problems faced by folks who are working in prisons. Specifically, we wanted to know how the system works. And I think Ariel asked you questions where you guys, Mr. Smith and Mr. Hamilton, added more to that conversation. How it works, what are the challenges, and what folks want to see in the way of reform. It quickly became very clear to us that while this campaign has always been putting an end to forced labor, which of course is really important, that people wanted to see something bigger, something bolder, and something that, as everyone has spoken about, involved, really created the structural change that we all want to see. A total end to the system that pays people pennies an hour, churns out millions of dollars in profit for the state, dangerous working conditions, unfair labor practices, and programs. I heard you both, Mr. Smith and Mr. Hamilton, say programs that provide real job training and a meaningful pathway to a job when you're released. As one of you said, like, where are you going to get a job? You've been making license plates for 20 years. What do those skills transfer to on the outside? So we heard them and we hear you. And with those principles in mind, we took another look at the existing bills that were part of this campaign when it was Labor is Labor. And so what we have as the centerpiece for our legislative campaign is the constitutional amendment bill, one bill to amend the Constitution and one bill to amend the corrections law. And I think people, the most kind of confusing part of this campaign, and bear with me here, is that our Constitution in the state of New York is not like many others, not like the federal Constitution and many, many constitutions in states, west of the Mississippi, that we do not have the identical provision of the 13th Amendment. We do not have a constitutional provision that abolishes slavery, except for people found guilty of crimes. We don't have that. And the reason we don't have that is because New York abolished slavery by law before the 13th Amendment was passed. So what do we have instead, which is equally insidious? We have this entire constitutional amendment that sets up a system of what they used to call convict leasing, right? So this is the idea that we still have today, that we can take the men and women who are incarcerated in our prisons and we can force them to work it used to be, they used to be able to force them to work, force folks to work in for a private corporation, like literally, you know, oh, here are all these people who we have free, cheap labor. Let's lease them out to, I don't know, General Electric to make washing machines or something. And then the guys at General Electric profit, you know, to the tune of millions and millions of dollars because they're paying their laborers nothing. Obviously, this was immoral, but interestingly enough, the labor unions had a hissy because they didn't want to have the competition for labor, free labor. And so I think they were a driving force actually to change that in our Constitution. So now what we have is, instead of private companies benefiting and profiting off the backs of incarcerated men and women, we just have transferred it all to the state, which you heard about, making license plates, making desks, making eyeglasses, and bringing in tens of millions of dollars in profits. So we need to change the Constitution, even though that is a cumbersome and lengthier process, because if we don't, and we just go and change the corrections law, the two will be inconsistent. And when two things are inconsistent, the Constitution rules. So if the Constitution permits this kind of system, and we've just passed a law that says the Department of Corrections is no longer going to administer this kind of system, that law is going to be invalid. It's going to be unconstitutional because we haven't changed the Constitution. So that's the constitutional lesson for today, and also why we need to change the Constitution. But really the heart of so much of what we're talking about today is, and so much what Mr. Smith and Mr. Hamilton were talking about, and there's like a little chart here on the screen, is creating a system that really is a new way in which to think about people who are working inside prisons. We have heard from many people, you know, I don't mind working. I like to work, but I don't want to work for nothing. I don't want to work in some humiliating or degrading job. I don't want to work in a job where I haven't been trained, a dangerous job where I could lose a finger. So what we did was we went through the corrections bill, we looked at some other states, and what we've come up with, which is a bill that will hopefully eliminate Corecraft and Corecraft-like systems, require that a minimum wage, we've put in there a minimum wage, the minimum wage for incarcerated people, safe working conditions, equitable access to work and work programs across the system and within prisons, eliminate fines and fees to ensure that commissary prices are not increased to offset wages. That was also something people told us, which was, oh yeah, we're going to make $3 an hour, and then everything in the commissary is going to cost, you know, $20 more. So it'll be the same system. So we're aware of that. Create a system where grievances can be filed relating to labor, like a real system. And people wanted better access to their earned wages, and eliminating unnecessary, and what we heard was very slow approval for sending your family money, and also more autonomy around paying child support while incarcerated. So as both Justin and Assemblymember Epstein said, this is not easy. Structural change, obviously, you all know that is not easy. And we're talking about eliminating a system that provides millions of dollars to the state. That said, you know, we're all in it till the end, in it for the fight. We're excited that you all have joined us, and I think we have a lot of work to do, but we are going to talk about that, I think next, or maybe after the Q&A, I'm not sure. But thank you, and I'm also obviously here to answer questions about the bills. Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa, for that incredible discussion about the state of the bill and how the New York Constitution is different from a lot of other constitutions in the United States. We had discussions, our steering committee had discussions with the ACLU of Colorado, and I can't remember the other state. I'm so sorry. It's slipping my mind right now, but they talked about how the update to their constitution was a technical moral update. And we are fighting a little bit different of a battle here in New York because we have already decided as New Yorkers that we do not want the 13th Amendment, but we have something that's a little bit I think a little bit more insidious in that it is specifically allowing the state to profit off of incarcerated labor. So thank you, Lisa, for that. And our next discussion, we're going to talk about just some of the goals of the TCHAM for today and some of our goals for the campaign. As you all know, campaigns need sponsors. They need people who are going to go to bat for this legislation when it comes down to it. So in the campaign, we are looking for co-sponsors. We have incredible sponsors in Senator Myrie and Assemblyman Epstein, and we really appreciate the work that they've done on this campaign. But in growing this coalition and in growing this campaign, we really would like to see other members come into the fold, especially from the upstate areas. We really want to be, I live in New York City, just full disclosure. So our campaign wants to be in solidarity with our upstate communities that are also affected by forced prison labor. So we're trying to reach out to, excuse me, other members in order to build the momentum. And so that's what we are asking you all, everyone who's here today, for help in that, just spreading this campaign, telling your networks to join the campaign, telling them to go to the landing page and really sign up so that they can have information about the actions that we do when we are ready to move forward. And Lisa, I'm not sure if I missed this part, but did you talk about the timeline for the ballot initiative? Okay. All right, Lisa, can you talk a little bit about like the technical part of passing this legislation?
Yes. So if we're talking about a constitutional amendment has to be passed in 2 successive legislative sessions. Legislative sessions are 2 years each. So we're in the second year now of the 21-22 session. So if we could get it passed this year in 2022, then it would have to pass one more time in the 23-24 legislative session. And the fall of the session it passed, we've been saying this a little bit differently, but I think this is correct. If it passes in 2023, first of all, it doesn't go to the governor. So the governor doesn't really have much of an opportunity to mess this up once the legislature passes it. What happens is it passes, the second time it passes, that fall, it goes to the voters for a vote. So if it passed in 2023, it would go in the fall of 2023. And if it passed in 2024, it would go in 2024, provided that we get it passed in 2022. So it's a longer process, but it's, as I said in my presentation, it's a necessary process. But we really, really got to get, since we're in the second year, in order not to get really far behind, we got to get that constitutional amendment passed this session.
Thank you, Lisa. So that is the call that we are pitching to all of you to get your networks involved in this work so that when we are ready to pass these through the consecutive legislation sessions and eventually take it to a referendum, that the communities that are affected, the communities that really care about this issue are really energized and motivated to be able to reach out to their elected officials, to reach out within their communities. This one of the second goals of our campaign is really education about this issue. There's not a lot of education about prison labor for, I believe, a number of reasons. One being that when we incarcerate people as a society, we label them as essentially a person that we have thrown away. We talk a lot about punishment within our society, you know, throw them away and, lock them away and throw away the key, and really see people who are incarcerated as a disposable part of the population, when really we want to emphasize that these are our community members, these are our loved ones, and even people who don't have loved ones who are incarcerated. These are people that we are in community with, that we live in neighborhoods with, and more importantly, people who live in New York State. And we believe through this campaign that everyone who lives in New York State deserves to be paid a wage that they can help support their family and not be placed in these dangerous conditions. So we would really like to educate people about what is happening in prison, and hopefully do that through the voices of directly impacted people. Some of the challenges that we expect, obviously, Courtcraft is a massive, massive, massive operation and is a state entity. So when we're talking about really going against the state and taking away the state's profit, we don't expect that the state is going to go down easy. I see attendee 38. We expect that a lot of the normal players that you would consider being opposed to some of these prison labor issues would be correct. The Department of Corrections, the NYPD, the Police Benevolence Association. I'm tripping over my words today. People who really do not see this population of incarcerated people as worthy of having anything. So we expect that when we're talking about fighting the state and we're talking about taking away money from the state, that this is not going to be an easy ask. But I personally believe that this campaign is a winning campaign. I would not be a part of this campaign if I did not see that it was a winning campaign. It's the hope and the optimism that pushes me forward in this work every day. So I believe that we're going to win. It may take longer than we think. It may not take as long as we think, but with all of you all's support, I know that we are going to really do something great in New York State. So now we have time for the Q&A. I think it might be easiest if I just read the questions that I see, and then whichever panelists can answer the question, just jump right in. If we don't have the answer to the question, which some of these we may not have the answers to, we'll just see if we can answer them to the best of our ability. And if we don't have an answer, we'll try and get back to you, because we really want to make sure that we are answering all your questions. So I'll start with attendee 11. How do you see work requirements that force people receiving public assistance and SNAP to work without pay? I think that unfortunately this campaign does not address people who are working outside of prisons and jails in New York State. So I don't have an answer about work requirements for people receiving public assistance and SNAP. Jackie or Lisa, do you have anything to say on that issue? Okay. I'm sorry, attendee 11, that this campaign does not address that. But if someone in the chat or someone here has information about that, this is a collaborative space. So please throw anything in the chat that you have to address some of our blind spots. Attendee 12 has a question concerning post-Civil War convict labor regimes. The jailers in the postbellum Jim Crow prison system have the same fear of convict uprising that slave owners during the antebellum period did of slave revolts. Ask this question because recent studies and comparisons and contrasts between antebellum slavery and postbellum prison regimes say nothing about the convict uprisings by chain gang and convict lessees, whereas they say plenty about slave insurrections. Unfortunately, Bill, I don't have an answer to that, but I do want to shout out at this point a similar campaign to the 13th Forward campaign, which is the Fix the 13th campaign, and I will drop the information for that in the chat. That is being led by organizers and directly impacted people, and they have really cited the Attica prison uprisings as some of the inspiration for their work with directly impacted people in prison labor, and trying to address some of the material conditions that people are facing while they're incarcerated. So I'm sorry we don't have an answer to that specific question, but that's a really good issue to highlight and for us to learn more about. How do you think the COVID-19 scheme will impact mass incarceration within the next 5 to 15 years? Does anyone want to jump in on that?
Well, I can just start by saying, and then I'll throw it to you, Jackie, that I do think that this issue was raised because of all those stories about incarcerated people. I mean, not raised, but like became in the public dialogue more than it ever had because of the stories of incarcerated people making hand sanitizer and other PPE while not provided with anything, any protective gear of their own. I think it was, COVID, it was unfortunate, but I think that COVID has, as we say in many spaces, laid bare a lot of the inequities in our society. And this issue was one that was highlighted because of COVID, what was going on with COVID. Jackie, you were going to say something.
I was just going to say that we're not political forecasters, but we are working on this fight. And I mean, we all get to choose what happens if we push our elected leaders to pass this legislative session. Then we're looking at a referendum in 2024, and we all get have the work cut out for us to do that.
Okay, next question. Is it true that employers are paid up to $25,000 to employ people who just got out of prison? I have not heard of that, but perhaps other people have. Again, if you have information about that, please put it in the chat. But I don't think we have any information about that in this campaign. But these are great questions. And I just want to add a point, like, I think that the questions that people are asking really speaks to how this issue is more than just prison labor, with the COVID-19 question about the nature of labor itself under our current capitalistic system and how labor is intentionally devalued and what that will look like moving forward. So I think all of these questions are really hitting at the idea that people are tired of the current system. They're tired of being exploited. And I think that we are moving towards a part in history where we will certainly see some changes either way. It is my understanding that prison-made goods, even though made through underpaid convicts, sell at prices way above instead of below the market rate to captive buyers, namely state government agencies. Thus, not only does the convict laborer get ripped off while the buyer has to pay for a product at a far higher price than they would have to pay if they could have purchased the same type of product at regular retail or wholesale outlet. Thus, only the owners and managers of the prison industry, along with the politicians who assist them, win from this fraudulent convict labor system, is my assumption right here.
I can take this one. I'm a research lead. So it's hard to so what this person was talking about is that there's written in the state, and something that our bill addresses, is that state agencies are required to buy from Courtcraft. State agencies, municipalities are required to buy from Courtcraft where Courtcraft provides, an appropriate product. So if the New York City public schools are trying to buy desks and Courtcraft creates desks, they're supposed to buy from Courtcraft. They spend, this is one of the reasons why our schools and are filled with desks that are made by people who are paid pennies an hour to make them. I'm not totally sure about what the price. My understanding is that the prices are below market rate, at least from what I've seen. Although we can certainly dig into that. And if you want to email me, I'll drop my email in the chat. We'd love to find out more information. But there's certainly this captive market is pretty insidious, and I'm glad that you brought it up.
Anyone else want to add on to that? I think
part of the issue is when you talk about market rate, it means you have to have something to compare it to. And like by definition, they are making things that don't have a comparable product, or a market industry. I mean, this is again, to talk about unions, this is something that is in the corrections law, that like you cannot start an industry that is directly competitive with another, private industry. So you're making coffins, but I don't know how you would put a market rate on that because they're unique. They're not competing with another. But it's a good point you raised. But I agree with you, Jackie. This whole you have to buy it from Corecraft is just a red flag for how could that possibly be giving people the best value for their money?
Okay. Aisha, I hope that I said that wrong. If I did, I'm so sorry. Said no letter of recommendation from prison staff when a formerly incarcerated individual finds potential employment. Mr. Hamilton or Mr. Smith, can you speak to whether or not a letter of recommendation from someone who works at the prison would be helpful in finding potential employment, or if that is irrelevant?
Well, I think that letters of, you said whether or not a letter of recommendation would help?
Yes, someone is asking if a letter of recommendation from someone who worked at a prison staff would help in finding employment after incarceration.
Absolutely. I think that, can you hear me? I think that anytime you get a recommendation that says you're a good worker, it goes a long way. It's just like, how we found on our resumes that we got, people that say that we're good. They vouching for us, right? So if I worked for 20 years and an officer vouches for me and say he's a hard worker, he comes to work on time, he's excellent at what he do. I mean, that hones my skill. Let somebody know I'm trustworthy. So I think that it definitely would work. We do it ourselves with our organization, with guys that we personally knew, guys that we personally was in prison for. When we write to the prison, we talk about how that individual might have impacted other people that was our peers, right? How that person might have been instrumental in me learning certain things or Kevin learning some things, and that helped them get out of prison, right? So imagine coming out with a letter that's saying that, look, not only this guy was good enough to get out, he had skills, right? He had skills. Skills is very important. And his experience in the workforce means a lot. So if he's been working for 5 years, he come home and said to an employer, they're not gonna believe him. But if he gets somebody from the Department of Correctional Services to say this guy got 5 years of experience, or 10 years of experience, or 20 years of experience, he can probably come in at a higher level entry than he would if they think he has no experience. So all those things definitely can help.
Thank you for that. That was really helpful, and I didn't know that myself, so I'm always learning. I'm going to just skip down to some short questions. People are asking, do we help people in different states? This is currently a New York campaign, but I know that there are a lot of other states who are working on this campaign. If you are interested in a specific state, reach out to us and we can see if we have connections with those states. But for the 13th Forward campaign, we are currently a New York State campaign. But thank you for that question. Vera Brooks said, over 20 years ago, working at a post-grad program, I discovered that our exam books were produced by prison labor. My colleague boss was equally appalled. What is there to be done? We searched to no avail for union-made products. Is it any different now? Jackie, do you want to talk a little bit about that? I think that from my perspective, what is to be done is really just to make noise about the issue. I think that a lot of people don't understand where the goods are coming from the state. I'm sure that a lot of the students at state universities would be appalled to know that, but this is an issue that has not really been, well publicized in a lot of places.
Yeah, so legislatively, right, this bill challenges that. But what we can do is, I went through 4 years of SUNY Binghamton, not knowing that the dorm from which I was sleeping on was made, I think at Auburn. And I, 18 years of New York City's public school. So I really do think spreading awareness, there's some great op-eds written by CUNY students pretty recently that you might want to share on your social media platforms. But yeah, spreading awareness and then getting involved with this campaign.
People in the chat are asking how to get involved. I am typing the registration link, 13th 13forward.com, as Lisa corrected me. So hopefully people can see that in the chat. And we will send that again for at the end. What are the suggestions for the amount of wages if they made the minimum wage at $3 an hour? A 40-hour work week is $120 a week. That will stimulate the prison economy. Thank you, Ernie, for the link, and thank you, Wilfredo, for the question. There have been discussions about a $3 minimum wage. I believe that former Governor Cuomo had that as a part of his platform before he resigned in disgrace. Lisa, do you want to talk about that?
I think that was his last gasp. Like, don't criticize me. I'm going to give you people a $3, minimum wage. But I do think that there, and I don't know that if Assemblymember Epstein or Senator Myree's folks are still on, but there definitely was, it seemed to be a path for that $3 minimum wage in the last couple of years. Whereas before, I think people thought it was impossible. And I think one thing I did want to say about the legislation, and this is a good segue to that, is that like all legislation, it will change over time and be informed by actually some of you who are going to work with us. I think that right now it has minimum wage, because as Assemblymember Epstein said, why would you be paid something less, if you're making the same product that somebody on the outside is making $15 an hour doing. But it will be a strategic decision, I think, at some point, which will be informed by impacted people. Like, do we want to hold out for $15? Is $3 good? Should we have a separate $3 bill? Those are kind of legislative strategy decisions to be made as we move forward. So we are certainly not the experts on that. And I've worked in many campaigns where not a move is made to that bill unless you call a group of impacted people and you talk about what it is that they think would be great. So or possible, or what is a trade-off? What's a trade-off that you would make? I don't know the answer to that.
Sorry, Lisa, to that point, Mr. Hamilton or Mr. Smith, do you want to talk about that? A $3 minimum wage? That's okay. If you have nothing to add, we really appreciate you.
I think $3 minimum wage, it's a start, right? I wouldn't say that it should be, something that's left. I think that $3 still undermines the value of the work that the person is putting in. I think whenever you don't pay someone equal, you tell them subconsciously that they're not worth, right? And if we are to value people, value human beings as human beings, just because I go to prison doesn't mean that I shouldn't be paid. And if you're gonna set $3 as the minimum wage for people in prison, I think that tells them that they're not worth. If you give them $3, then you should give them a retirement plan or some type of other compensation, 401k or something. Like, give them something else with the $3 so that when they leave prison, they have some type of funds. You can give them $3 and then put $3 in the bank account. Whichever way you feel. But I think that for me, the goal is to make sure that when these guys leave prison after hard labor, that they got some cushion, right? They don't have to come home and feel like, if their family members die. Some people do 30 years in prison, they come and have nobody, right? They got to go to shelters. So I think, we should look at that. We should look at the hardship of what it's like to be in prison, and we should pay them accordingly. I would think half of what the minimum wage would be a good starting point. If they're getting $15 in society, you give them $7, right? And that would be a starting point to, I think, say, well, hey, we might not feel that you 100% are the same as someone in society, but at least we putting you at 50. I say 100%, but at least let them know that they're valuable, and that you think that their labor is equal to, or at last more than, $3 is just not even a quarter, or maybe a quarter. So I just think it should be half at the very least.
Can I say one thing?
Absolutely. Thank you.
This $3 minimum wages, would that be taxed? Because the state government gonna want to tax that. Would that be taxed?
That's a good question. It is a good question. Yeah, it obviously shouldn't be taxed if it's $3. I mean, and are you going to pay unemployment? Right? Is that what you're going to say? Unemployment, Social Security, all those things that, yeah, it's a good question. It's a good note.
It can't be taxed. It can't be taxed, because if it be taxed, then they gotta let you vote. So they don't want to do all that. So they can't tax.
You know what? In theory, you are absolutely right, but aren't we always surprised by what they can't do
Yes.
and what they end up doing? So,
Yes.
yeah, that's interesting.
Thank you. All right, next question. Will the transcript be available? We are recording this, and with the live transcription, I'm going to hope that the transcription will also be available, but we are recording, and we will work on sending this out with a recap and all the ways for people to get involved in this campaign. So thank you for that question. Abby Dobson, are the experiences of women who are incarcerated similar or different to the experiences of the men whose important stories are being shared with us today? Thank you for that question. I'm going to start with that. We had a forum with directly impacted people, including women, and they certainly talked about some of the same issues that Mr. Smith and Mr. Hamilton did, in the arbitrariness of it and how degrading it was to realize that the people who are incarcerated are really making the prison run. But obviously they did have some different gendered experiences that fueled their time while they were incarcerated. But one thing that I found interesting was that the women reported also that they were breadwinner. They were their family's breadwinners when they were incarcerated, similar to the men, in that a lot of the people who are being taken out of the communities and sent upstate are primary breadwinners for their families. And obviously the instability that causes for families, for children, for communities is incredible. Does anyone else want to talk about some of the experiences that the women discussed at our directly impacted forum?
Yeah, I definitely remember taking away another very important point, that retaliation, in terms of sexual assault, and the opposite, rewarding people with good jobs if the women would have sex with the person who was the decision maker, was rampant. I remember hearing that. And that I think in general, the women don't have access to the highest paid jobs, like the core craft type jobs. Am I remembering that correctly, Jackie?
There are different factories at different prisons. I think at Albion, it's a call center at a women's prison. But yeah, it's similar.
Okay, next question. This might be a Jackie question. Might clothing be produced through inmate labor? Can you talk about some of the other goods that are produced?
Sure. So, sorry, the commenter asked if clothing was, or?
Yes.
So yeah, incarcerated, I'm forgetting now, I'm sorry, the specific prison, but prison uniforms are made by Corecraft. Many like heavy jackets that are used by EMS workers are made in prison in Corecraft factories. Other goods, I mean, go to a public building, honestly, like Assemblymember Harvey Epstein said, the seats that they sit on in the New York State Assembly are made by incarcerated workers who are paid slave wages and who are forced to work. But I'll just tell you something that you might see in your daily walk. So the steel mesh garbage cans on the street in New York City, made by incarcerated workers. License plates. Every single license plate that's on the road went through a facility. And again, I'm sorry, I've forgotten the facility's name. Soap dispensers at government buildings, desks at office furniture. The NYPD during the early months of the pandemic made a multi-$1,000 order for office supplies like standing desks, something that comes to mind. So it's a pretty, I mean, it's a manufacturing enterprise. And it's very, they also hire out incarcerated workers to do, like Ariel was saying earlier, asbestos services, asbestos abatement services. So it's a serious enterprise. I hope I've covered most of what you were wondering about.
Okay, next question. Forced labor is a human rights abuse sanctioned internationally. Why is there no international attention on this abuse in the US? Does anyone want to go? I have lots of thoughts on this. Beginning with the United States is such a huge corporation. It's such a huge country. And its position within the political nexus of the world really makes it so that a lot of human rights abuses that the United States would normally invade over in other countries are ignored. I think about back in the 50s, we charged genocide, taking these human rights abuses directly to the UN and nothing being done about it because of the way that white supremacy and racism and structural oppression have worked in the United States for hundreds of years. I think the best answer to that is that the US is the biggest bully, and the bully gets to do what the bully wants. So while we have police oppressing and murdering people in the United States, we have the US military being imperialist abroad and murdering Black and brown people across the world. So obviously this is a New York State campaign, so we don't focus on international human rights for this specific issue, but this is something that I think is a really important point to make, that this is human rights abuse. And yeah, thank you, Gabriel. Yeah, just a veil for imperialism as well. So thank you for that question. Does anyone else have thoughts on that? We can talk about US imperialism all day long, but we don't have that much time. Okay. Antoinette Nelson, I see you have a couple questions. I'm going to read them together. Would it make sense to take away the incentive to incarcerate by counting the incarcerated people in the home community not as dependents in counties where they are incarcerated? I'm seeing in the chat that that may have changed with the last census. Someone said that their incarcerated loved one was told to count in the home community. So maybe that has taken away an incentive. What about resistance from National Fraternal Order of Police, whose members include judges, bail bondsmen, attorneys, private medical services that profit from the prison complex? Have we considered getting rid of the 13th Amendment exception clause by enacting a new amendment to make it mute? Lisa, I think you can talk to the last one, but as to the second one, there's huge resistance from cops, judges, bail bondsmen, as some of the reasons that Mr. Smith and Mr. Hamilton talked about earlier. Prisons are an entire business, and the criminal legal system is an entire business as well, with the fines, with the fees, with the incarceration of people, with the number of ancillary businesses that are profiting off of people who are purposefully being targeted based on their race, ethnicity, or national origin. So I think this is just indicative of, the justice, I wouldn't say it's a justice system. The criminal legal system is absolutely a business and profits off of the most vulnerable people in our societies, the most marginalized people in our societies, for a reason. I think I read once that the IRS actually audits poor people more than rich people because they just don't have the expense to deal with rich people's lawyers. So they target the people who they can bully, and those are poor people and people who are living in poverty. So all of these systems combine to oppress, and we are just trying to address one tiny part of a huge system that has been perpetuating itself for hundreds of years in this country. And for many years before the founding of what we know as the US. Lisa, can you talk a little bit about the 13th Amendment exception? We talked about how New York doesn't really have what we traditionally think as the 13th exception.
Sorry, what was the specific question? Now I've forgotten that.
That's okay. Have we considered getting rid of the 13th Amendment exception clause by enacting a new amendment to make it mute?
So you're talking about in our state constitution, right? That's the question. And I think I explained that we don't have the parallel 13th Amendment language. We didn't need a provision that said slavery is abolished, because slavery was abolished before the 13th in New York, before the 13th Amendment was passed. So
Lisa, I think there's an amendment that the federal 13th Amendment is what Antoinette Nelson was talking about. So
sorry.
There are people that was my mistake. So there are people in the chat who are talking about in the exception that is working on federal work. Our former steering committee members, Worth Rises, is working on 13th Amendment federal work. So if you're interested in the federal 13th Amendment and changing that exception clause, please get connected with that work. There are people who are typing endtheexception.com in the chat. So please feel free to follow up with those organizations. And thank you for those questions. And I'm sorry for cutting you off, Lisa. I just want to be clear.
I don't have anything more to say. That's fine. Thank you, Ariel.
You're muted.
Sorry. Looks like we have a few more questions. And if you have any lingering questions, please put them in the Q&A. And in about 1 minute, I'm going to close the questions so we can make sure that we get through all of these Q&As. This is the last portion of our presentation. So if you have to jump, no worries. We're just really wanting to make sure that people are getting their questions answered. So Han Lu, do we already know if incarcerated workers would be covered by New York State minimum wage laws automatically if the constitutional amendment passes, or are there explicit exclusions in the state minimum wage laws that will require more legislation? Lisa, this is a question for you.
Right up my alley, right? Like ding, ding, ding. I won $10,000 because I can answer this. So whoever asked that question, great question. And yes, there are exceptions in the minimum wage. The way that minimum wage works in New York is that there's a statute that enables minimum wage, but really it is administered by these wage orders. And so you have to be listed in the wage order, and there are exceptions, groups of workers who are accepted from minimum wage. For example, I do a lot of work with farm workers. And for many, many years, they were, because, and maybe people know this because of this space, that, when the Fair Labor Standards Practices Act was passed in 1938, the Roosevelt administration had to make a deal with a racist deal with Southern Democrats who were against Black people getting equal pay. And so the law, literally to this day in the federal government, gives most everybody minimum wage, except for the two categories of workers who were largely Black at that time, agricultural workers and domestic workers. And that is literally the federal law today. And literally, we had a state legislation that kind of mimicked that in New York for many, many, many years. And in 2019, like literally it was 3 years ago, 2019, we passed the Farm Labor Fair Labor Standards Act and got rid of the exception for agricultural workers. But last point, I'm sorry, because I work on this issue too. Farm workers are still denied overtime pay after 40 hours like everybody else. They have to work 60 hours in order to get overtime pay. So, and that is, farm workers are brown, largely brown Latinx people today, and it is a direct outgrowth of racist, anti-Black sentiment in the federal government in the 1930s.
Thank you, Lisa, our labor guru. Next question, can prisoners get out of firefighting jobs if they feel it's too dangerous? Jackie, do we have people firefighting? And it seems that the short answer is probably no. Well, maybe.
I don't believe we have firefighting crews in New York State, unlike states like California and Oregon, where there are huge incarcerated crews. But Mr. Smith and Mr. Hamilton, is that something that you guys know about?
In certain medium facilities, there's incidents where they may utilize individuals to go into a town. If something is on fire in the town, they may use them to go in and act as firemen. Certain mediums upstate, they do utilize inmates. I don't like to call them inmates. They do utilize people to go fight fires. Now, do they have training? I can't answer that because you need training to be a firefighter, but I know that certain mediums, they do utilize individuals to go fight. I don't know how huge the fire may be, but they do. I heard of that incident. I have not seen it because I have not really been into a medium, but I've heard of that. So what I'm speaking on is what I heard of, hearsay. But I heard they have utilized their labor to go fight fires.
Based on everything that you told us so far, I would assume that they do not have a choice in being able to do that or would be subject to solitary and other punishments if they choose not to. Thank you.
And mediums, they can really impose like work duties on you because individuals who are in mediums, they're more closer to leaving prison because their time has decreased, so they could enforce labor on you. So a lot of times they have guys in mediums doing all sorts of jobs that some of them may don't want to do, but they do it because they want to compromise. They don't want to catch a misdemeanor report and be sent to a max and lose the status that they're in. So in mediums, they really take advantage of you in a medium. I know that for a fact. In terms of the work jobs, I know that for a fact.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Your experience is like invaluable in this space. And I'm so thankful that you got an opportunity to speak to everyone here. Amy, is there a distinction in the use of forced labor versus slavery when discussing mandated and or incredibly low wage work in prisons? For our campaign, I think that our use of forced labor and slavery, I think we like to use the term slavery to really emphasize the history and how this forced labor is not in a vacuum. It's connected to a lot of the racist oppressive history, especially in New York State. I think a lot of people have misinformation about the effects of chattel slavery and think of them as limited to Southern states because that's where the majority of chattel slavery happened, but certainly New York State profited off of people who were enslaved and their labor. Wall Street is one of the best examples of some of the first commodities being traded were human lives and enslaved Africans. So we want to emphasize the use of slavery. I think that when we're talking about people who are in the system and who are trying to keep the system, I don't think that they would use either term. But I think that forced labor and slavery, we want to hopefully be as intentional as we can be in connecting what's happening today with the history. Does anyone else want to speak on that? Okay. Is there a set goal that the campaign is asking the wage paid to be lifted to? If it is not minimum wage, who will set that wage? How will it be ensured that the prison industrial complex does not find loopholes to keep more of the money in ways that they already do? Excuse me, Lisa, do you want to speak to that? That we are currently, our campaign is focused on the actual ending of the forced labor and the constitutional amendment. There are a few real wage bills that have not been reintroduced this session. So for this part, Lisa, do you want to speak to that or?
Yeah, I mean, we did put in our, this is when I was making my presentation, if I wasn't clear, we did expand the Department of Corrections bill that used to be, that was the bill part that we inherited from Labor is Labor. And we really did expand it to make a system that hopefully reflected what incarcerated people have been telling us. And we did put in a minimum wage there, the minimum wage, like, and we defined it by the minimum wage that's that everybody else gets. So to answer your question though, who's going to decide that? This is kind of what I was alluding to, which is that, you know, all this legislation is kind of a process, right? That you have this ask, then that's informed, then where it goes from there is informed by either the sponsors themselves that say like, this is not going to fly, but this will, or, and then it's up to you to say, well, you know what? Too bad. It's my way or the highway, right? I've been in those positions before where you say it's my way or the highway. Then they often say, well, better half a loaf than no loaf at all. And then, you know, it's all a negotiation. But again, as I hope I made clear, we are not the deciders. We are just the facilitators. And everyone in this campaign, particularly and especially the impacted people that are working with us, will be the ones who ultimately decide if the legislature says, well, you're not going to get $15 an hour. We can only offer you $7. So maybe some people think that's great. Maybe, as I think it was Mr. Hamilton was saying, because I just thought of this while he was saying, maybe it's $7 and then the other $7.50 and then the other $7.50 in kind of a 401k for when you get out. You know, maybe that would be more palatable to the legislators who are deciding this. Again, it will be a process that will happen over time and hopefully always be informed by people who are impacted and at the center of the legislation.
All right, we have 5 minutes and 3 questions. I think we can do it. Are you working in solidarity with the Sentencing Project, an excellent organization with similar goals? Not at this point, but we are always looking to partner with people. This work, we hope that that we get to be expansive with our work and know that we all have a part to play in this fight. So hopefully we can get connected. Next question, do you think if it were financially painful for the state to pay incarcerated individuals, there would be less people funneled into the prison system? The optimist in me wants to say yes, but the realist in me, unfortunately, I think the answer is no. If there's anything that the state can do, it's rebrand itself into continuing to oppress people, especially when it comes to either oppressing Black and Brown people or getting cheap labor. So I don't think that the state would be there, that there would be less people in the prison system. Does anyone else want to speak to that?
Yeah, I'll just make a quick note. So Corecraft is an incredibly, lucrative enterprise, right? Right, $50 million a year. Can you imagine? It's not even 2% of the New York State Department of Corrections annual budget. So it doesn't save to incarcerate people and then have them manufacture goods, right? Even though we incarcerated people do most all the maintenance jobs, maintaining New York State's prisons, it's still ludicrously expensive to incarcerate. That's because we've decided, there are systems in place, right, that get rich off of incarceration in New York State. So I think that the pessimist in us, right, sees how expensive it is to keep these systems of oppression and how they've maintained.
Anyone else want to talk about that? If not, we'll move on to the last question.
I just want to say, yeah, Corecraft has deep pockets. If they paid individual $20 an hour, this would be back pay for long years of slave labor, like 40 acres and a mule, that's due and owed to us. So it wouldn't hurt them. They'll just probably look for another product to produce to make more money, because people in prison, it definitely wouldn't cut off people from coming to jail.
I think you said it all, Mr. Smith. So final question. If you'd be willing to address a question about the federal and non-New York movements, just as an aside, I'm not sure how much we can answer, but we will try. How sure are we that abolishing the exception clause would affect the legality of prison labor? My understanding is that much prison upkeep labor has or can be justified under a housekeeping clause, wherein someone can be required to keep their space tidy or otherwise considered to be legal. And as Mr. Smith mentioned, people often apply for the industry jobs because they pay more. So the structure of alternatives inside prison can create a situation in which authorities can assert that prison industry labor is not forced. I'm not sure if we have an answer for the nuances in terms of outside of or the federal campaign or non-New York campaigns. Does anyone want to speak to the nuances about that in New York State prisons?
I think it would be a legal challenge. I mean, you know, I work for the NYCLU. We're constitutional law people, and I think that I think whoever just asked that question, asked a really important question. So if you eliminate slavery that is allowed as punishment for a crime, there's all sorts of ways you can say, well, this work is not slavery as punishment for a crime, right? So it would be a legal challenge that people would have to argue that this is just modern day, which we all know is modern day slavery.
We are at 7:59. I love it when things end right on time. I would just like to say thank you all for joining us and be a part of this conversation. First and foremost, thank you to Mr. Smith and Mr. Hamilton. We really appreciate you sharing your experiences. They were powerful, they were moving, and I think people really can understand the gravity of this issue with your testimonies. Thank you to our legislative sponsors, Senator Myrie and Assemblyman Epstein. Thank you to all of you for taking time out of your weeknight to participate with us. Ernie has put the link in the chat. I also want, for getting involved with this work, I also want to uplift the work of a similar campaign, Fix the 13th New York, that has organized a lot of directly impacted folks. They'll be having a launch on Monday, on Martin Luther King Day. Ernie has put that in the chat. Thank you to the incomparable Ernie Britt. You all were impersonating him for a bit, but you see he's as good as it gets. So thank you all for joining us, and we hope that you can stay connected with the campaign and look out for our actions, our sister campaign. They'll be having the event on 12 p.m. on Monday. Thank you so much, and have a great day.